Hi, and welcome to another edition of Newsmakers Journal of the Plague Year. I'm Jerry Roberts. It is Wednesday, December 9th, and we are honored to be talking this morning to John Woolley, political science professor at UCSB and co-director of the American Presidency Project. John, thanks so much for taking the time to talk with us.
Good to be with you, Jerry.
Let's start with the project itself. Can you, for those of our viewers who aren't familiar with it, what is the American Presidency Project?
It's a large website that has mostly public documents from presidents, speeches, interviews, proclamations, executive orders, messages to Congress, on and on, plus a bunch of other statistics that we have assembled. The idea for the American Presidency Project was to have a resource that undergraduates at UCSB taking my presidency class could use to do original source research on presidents. And after a while, we discovered that the traffic coming to the website was far more than could be accounted for by students. And eventually the light bulb went on, which was that people out there in the world had found this and were finding it useful. And that was a kind of a actually to find out that you're that's useful to the broader world. And then things, particularly with the help of my co-director, Gerhard Peters, kind of spiraled out of control, and it's become like a hobby that's run wild.
But it's, I mean, it's nonpartisan, it's nonprofit, and it is, I think, the largest online collection of presidential documents, or close to it. I know you have all of President Trump's tweets on there, for one thing.
We do have. I'm not. I don't think we're completely up to date on President Trump tweet the way we do it. We're not trying to stay immediately up to date. We're trying to be an archive and a resource, but we have added Trump's tweets. We're going to have every tweet that he tweeted, at least since becoming a candidate. And everything is searchable. So yeah, we make a big point about the fact that we're nonpartisan in our public life. Obviously, we have our private lives, which may be sometimes more frank, but the public persona of the American Presidency Project is that we are completely nonpartisan. And in the past, we've had the sort of pleasant experience of being contacted by people or seeing that people in competing political campaigns, presidential campaigns, were using our website as a resource. And so that's kind of cool.
Yeah. And your research as a professor, political science professor, has been largely on the American presidency, correct?
You know, I have been doing work on the American presidency. That wasn't where I started out. Where I started out was doing research on the Federal Reserve and monetary policy and economic policy, and in fact, comparative economic policy of advanced industrial countries. And so the funny story was that when I came to UCSB, the guy who was the chair of the department at the time and I were talking on the phone, and the question was, what do I want to teach? And he said, well, of course, you'll be teaching this and this, which are in your specialty. And then which of the following three classes would you like to teach? And I had never taught any of them. And so I picked the one that sounded most likely to be sort of fun and something I could get into, and something I knew I had friends who were teaching elsewhere and I could steal from them, and that was the presidency. So there's a famous political scientist who has had an axiom that he said, which was teach what you write and write what you teach. And and I discovered in the course of teaching the presidency that I developed questions. It was like, I didn't understand why this table looked this way, or why did they make this claim? This claim didn't really backed up with evidence. And so I became a scholar of the presidency in that respect. So what the Presidency Project is from a scholarly perspective is just this giant database, which can be drawn on to do analyses.
Okay. All right, well, let's talk about the presidency and what's going on with it now. It's interesting that on the homepage of the project this morning, I see it says how presidential candidates concede. And obviously, President Trump is breaking new ground in that. Is there any parallel in the history of the presidency to what is happening now?
Well, the question is, what do you mean by what is happening now? Okay, so there is one of the things, this front page feature that you noticed, and I could show people if you're interested, the front page, but this is a feature. This is a database, a little table that we constructed of concession speeches and messages by presidential candidates, losing candidates, dating back to 1896. So here's a pop quiz question for you, Jerry. Who was the losing presidential candidate in 1896?
William Jennings Bryan.
William Jennings Bryan. And William Jennings Bryan is the first presidential candidate, everybody seems to agree on, who communicated a message to the winner, who was McKinley, that he had of congratulations. It's a very brief telegram. And before that, this wasn't sort of a practice, but then it became a practice starting with Bryan. And so one of the interesting characteristics about Bryan's concession, and we have this if you go to the page and look at it, the campaigns at that point were very much actually managed by the parties. So we think of Donald Trump as being the boss of the campaign and not the Republican Party. But in 1996, the Democratic Party was really running William Jennings Bryan's campaign, and Republican Party was really McKinley's campaign. And so the initial communications about the outcome of the election were coming from the national chairman of the campaigns. In fact, I can't resist this, so let me go to the William Bryan case, and there's a long footnote on this document. Mm-hmm. So Bryan himself wrote this little note that said, Senator Jones, doesn't explain who Senator Jones is. Senator Jones had just informed me that the returns indicate your election, this is to McKinley, and I hasten to extend my congratulations. We have submitted the issue to the American people and their will is law. And so there's the two characteristic elements of a campaign concession. You won, the people decided this. I'm disappointed. I didn't want it to turn out this way, but that's what it means in a democracy. When the people decide, that's the outcome. But in the long footnote, so Senator Jones was the Democratic National Committee chairman, and he had issued a statement before Bryan's issued his, in which he said about the election, it is one of the closest contests that the people have been called on to determine in recent years. We have claimed the election on our advices from states admittedly in doubt, in which we knew there had been many frauds, was evidence of tampering with the returns. It seems now to be apparent that while after making the most brilliant, having carried most of the states, claimed to be not carried enough to assure his success in the college. So party chairman was issuing a statement saying they won, there was fraud, but the important thing was that the candidate himself conceded, and there wasn't a protracted, ongoing attempt to
Yeah.
sort of, to overturn the election.
That is interesting.
So,
yeah.
and so in terms of where we are right now, there's never been an instance that I'm aware of where a presidential candidate has attempted over and over again, after the votes have been counted, to go back and find ways to reverse the outcome in states. Rather, not simply by a recount, but by trying to get a legislature to sort of invalidate the election. There have been lots of controversies, though. We've had, brutal fights.
Well, one of the other things that strikes me about Brian's message is that he says, I hasten to add. And I just scrolled through really quickly, looking at the dates at which the losers had conceded to the winners. And I think in all but one case, they're all within a few days of the election, if not the day after the election, with obviously the exception of 2000, the Gore-Bush, which is a special case where there was a recount. Trump is not only not hastening to concede, he's making it clear that he believes, or says he believes, that the election of Joe Biden was illegitimate,
Yes.
and is going to carry that forward, past January 20th, apparently. Is there anything you're aware of in the history of presidents where someone, even though they've conceded, has continued to insist that the duly elected president is illegitimate?
Well, in 24, there was an election that ended up being decided in the House of Representatives, because Andrew Jackson lost. And Andrew Jackson maintained that Adams election by a corrupt bargain. He called it a corrupt bargain that was made in the House of Representatives, in which Clay's supporters supported Adams, and Jackson lost. And Jackson was bitter about that, and he continued to fight, and basically sort of to campaign for president from that point forward. But there was not this sort of ritual of concession, but he was defeated, he lost, it was decided in the House. So he's not in the table there at this point, issuing some kind of a statement. Hillary Clinton conceded right away in a very typical gracious concession statement. But she did later on have interviews in which she said that Donald Trump was not a legitimate president. So I think that the sort of explicit doubting of the legitimacy of the president was clear with George W. Bush, where a whole bunch of Democrats thought that George W. Bush was not the legitimate president of the United States. A bunch of them didn't think that Al Gore should have conceded when he did. He made a really splendid session speech.
Remarkable.
But he did not express doubts about Bush's legitimacy, to my knowledge, ever. Many Democrats were absolutely certain that Bush was not a legitimate president. So this notion, sort of a widespread sense among a candidate supporter that the winner was not legitimate, that's not entirely new. So the test really will be the sort of decisive moment for will come. I'm getting a message that my connection is unstable.
I can hear you. Okay.
Okay, that Trump we will come up to this point in another few days where the votes will be cast in the states. And at that point, it will be truly and officially over, except for the counting of those votes, which is mostly just clerical in January. And at that point, that is the point basically at which Gore conceded to Bush. Supreme Court they decided at the timing that they did because these votes needed to be cast in order to avoid the contest being cast into the House of Representatives. So we'll see. I don't expect him to concede.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think one of the things that's, and I stipulate I've been very alarmist on this whole situation, but that, none of the members of his party, or very few members of his party, are recognizing Biden as the president-elect, which he clearly is, which seems to me to sort of broaden the issue to, it's one of the political parties that is not recognizing it, and I think has led to a lot of the media coverage and commentary that has used the word coup, that what we're watching, albeit absurd and farcical and all of the other Rudy Giuliani things, it is in fact an attempt to illegitimately overthrow a government. Is that an accurate application of the word, do you think?
Well, it seems to me a bit premature at this point to say that. I think that I think that most of these people have been fairly clear about the notion that what they believe is that every legitimate vote should be counted and non-legitimate votes should be not counted. And they may never yield on the view that many of the Biden votes were not legitimate, that there was something wrong about the counting of the ballots or the way the ballots were acquired. But I think they will, for the most part, accept the outcome in the sense that they will call him President Biden. Although, we need to not forget that there have been past elections where there was a great deal of humor drawn from sort of denying the legitimacy of the president. So Rutherford Hayes, who won a contested election with Samuel Tilden that was decided in the House, was known as Rutherford Hayes, and called your fraudulency instead of your president, the president. So it remains to be seen, but it may be maybe a bit soon. My feeling about all this, Jerry, really is that the key to all this is not thinking and not trying to simply understand the behavior of specific members of Congress, but it's about understanding the amazing relationship that Trump has established with his base voters, who are highly mobilized, highly mobilizable, and he can still turn them on. If he gave an order, a directive, urged people to do something, I think they would do it, and a lot of people would do it. And so rank and file Republicans are afraid of the man. That's my read on it. A whole lot of Republicans are afraid of him because they don't want the troops unleashed against them. And you can watch Trump's behavior toward and his core supporters' behavior toward real mainline Republicans who are hardcore Republicans in Georgia, in the state of Georgia. I'm sure their heads are spinning, and I'm sort of shocked too that they're being attacked and told that they're traitors, and so a lot. It's that connection of Trump and his core supporters that's really underlying a lot of this. And that's why things might go on.
Yeah, and that's a great point, because it's not even so much that they're afraid of him; they're afraid of his voters. 74 million of whom voted for him, and I think some of us sitting in the liberal precincts of Santa Barbara find that amazing, astonishing, that would be the case. But it does make you wonder, if someone who was more competent about government could have carried this out, or had there been one state, if it was down to Pennsylvania that was deciding it, because Biden really did win a pretty big victory, 5% in the popular vote and 306 electoral votes. So it goes to a broader question that I wanted to ask you about, which is, constitutionally, we have so many of these structures: the Electoral College, the Senate, which favors rural states over urban states, gerrymandering in the House and a number of other states that seem to sustain and reinforce the power of what is really a minority of voters in the country. Is there something in those structures, in that constitutional structure, that needs to be changed, do you think? I mean, is this a sustainable way for us to go forward with a majority of people being constantly kind of said, nah, you won, but you didn't really win?
Yeah. I think almost everybody, except people benefiting from the Electoral College, think the Electoral College is a big problem. And people are puzzling about how to deal with the Senate as well, because the Senate also, heavily overrepresents small states, not very populated states. And so it doesn't have the kind of population distribution embodied in it that the House of Representatives does. But on the other hand, we also know that House seats can be gerrymandered, and so the House doesn't really completely represent the population either. The proportion of votes cast don't, and the Democrats don't win the proportion of seats that's equivalent to the proportion of votes that they're winning in the popular vote. So yeah, the Electoral College is a big problem, because without, one of the magic bits that George W. Bush took advantage of, but also Donald Trump has really perfected, was the sort of mobilization of a group of constituencies in these sort of small Electoral College states to be fervent supporters of the Republican candidate. And that's a huge advantage. And that's not, that has gotten reinforced by our sort of our media silos, our separation. We've become sort of separate countries in some respects. We read different things, we watch different things, we live in different places, we're more ideologically separated than probably ever before. So all that stuff sort of creates mischief with the Electoral College, because the Electoral College isn't something that sort of tempers and moderates and guards against populist demagoguery. It can amplify it. And so one of the things that I expressed doubt about when Donald Trump was, or early in his presidency, was whether a man who was never going to enjoy the approval and support of a majority of the population could have anything like a successful presidency and have any hope of getting reelected. It just seemed to fly in the face of everything we know about presidents, which is that you need to broaden your base, you need to reach out, and you need to do that not because of some noble notion about what it means to lead the country, but because that's the key to actually leading the country. you have to garner support. You have to mobilize those people. And Donald Trump never did it. And to some degree, what he's doing is following the playbook that was outlined by George W. Bush, who also followed a base strategy rather than a sort of center strategy, which is more typical of the Democrats, who don't have this kind of fervent, highly mobilized set of constituencies.
But at least Bush, I think, made a pretense of trying to unify the country, or used perhaps the rhetoric of unification in attempting to do that. You know, even with the Iraq War, you know, it was sort of cloaked in high-minded words about freedom and liberty and all of these other things. So he at least, you know, paid homage to American ideals. I don't see that Trump has ever done that. I mean, he never, on election night, when he was surprised to have been elected, he made a brief statement to that effect. But it never came back. He really, you know, made clear he was the president of the red states. I've found that the most remarkable thing of all, I think.
Yes, that's I think that's right. And you know, George W. Bush was he wasn't the sort of angry man that Donald Trump is. He didn't use Twitter. Twitter didn't exist. He couldn't have used Twitter, but he didn't communicate in that way. George W. Bush had a kind of sense of humor about himself, and that Donald Trump doesn't have. And so, and the defining factor in the George W. Bush administration was 9/11, which transformed his presidency. Was a vast unifying moment for the nation. The George W. Bush's approval ratings reached the highest approval rating of any president for whom we have data. But the election of 2004 was a very close election, a very heavily contested election, where an incumbent president had problems, and he, you know, relied on sort of mobilizing a core group of constituencies, evangelicals, anti-abortion people, traditional sort of moral majority conservatives. That was this sort of emphatic base strategy. So George W. Bush is kind of a sort of very nice and polite version of sort of showing a set of strategies that could be worked and exploited by Donald Trump. Donald Trump, by all accounts, Donald Trump is as surprised by the fact that he became the president as anybody else.
Yeah.
You know, he thought he was building up the business.
Before we run out of time, I want to ask you just about, you know, how you see things unfolding over the next 4 or 5 weeks until we get to Inauguration Day on January 20th. And of course, in this sort of scorched earth strategy to try to hold on to power, one of the things that Trump has been trying to do is to urge legislators to appoint alternative electors for the actual counting, the Electoral College. And we did have this situation in 2016 where I think 2 electors, so-called faithless electors, did not vote for Trump from their state. So we actually only won 304 instead of 306. You know, is that something that's likely to occur? Is there any parallel to that situation that could expand where Biden would face any problem in the Electoral College?
Well, the Supreme Court made a ruling earlier this year that states could impose restrictions on the votes of Electoral College voters. And most states have those restrictions in place, but not all of them. So it is possible still to have faithless electors. And I haven't seen a calculation of even the possibility of enough faithless electors in the right states, you know, shifting the outcome in Trump's direction. but that's a strategy. That was a concerted strategy in 2016 to try to flip the Electoral College, and it's a possibility. I don't think that's gonna happen. I'm not saying Trump won't try it. My theory about Donald Trump a lot, and particularly in his public statements and the kinds of things he tends to do, is that he knows he's got this connection to his base that's magic. It's really magic, and he feeds off of that. He loves the rallies and the cheering and the hats and the banners and so forth, and a lot of his public behavior, I think, makes sense when you realize that what he's trying to do is communicate to those people that he's their guy. He's fighting for them. He said he was going to fight. He's fighting, and he knows it's over. He knows he can't win, but what he wants to do is to keep proving his bona fides to his constituents, and so he takes things that he knows, or he should know, or his advisors know, are not going to succeed, and his presidency is full of these kinds of things right off the bat. The Muslim travel ban, that was a loser. That was a loser from the get-go. Anybody that saw that order from the moment it came out, it was like, well, this is not going to stand. But that didn't matter, I don't think, from Trump's perspective, which was that what mattered for him was that it be clear to his constituencies that he fights for them. He fights for what he says he's going to fight for. And so I think he will. I don't think that motive is going to go away. I think the big question is whether he's going to actually campaign again for 2024. I kind of find it hard to believe that he really would want to do that. But the idea of campaign, the idea of fighting, has been a big source of funding. He's had millions and millions of dollars flow into him. It's a honeypot. Why should he stop? Why should he give that up? So there's that thing going on for him, and it doesn't mean that he really is serious about it or that he thinks he's gonna not have the election. It's that he wants to keep the process going.
And it also freezes the field.
Yes.
If his son or his daughter or someone else he has in mind to be the candidate, it's certainly a strategy for doing that. Well, I haven't asked you about the new president or the president-elect, and I should remember him, the guy who presumably is going to be inaugurated on January 20th. So how does Biden handle this situation, where half the country's believing, or maybe not quite half, but a large portion, that he's illegitimate, that he's stolen the election, that's going to be surprised that he's inaugurated? I can't think of anything except for Abraham Lincoln, maybe in 1860, where someone has faced such a situation going into the White House.
Well, of course, Abraham Lincoln is as extreme a comparative case as we can imagine, right? Where between the election date and the inauguration date, half the country seceded and formed their own government, and there were fights going on and so forth. I don't see that happening.
Well, that's good. There's good news.
The day after Donald Trump's inauguration was the largest march of women in the history of the country, protesting Donald Trump. And that was not intended to send a signal to him of unity. And people among Donald Trump's constituencies haven't forgotten that. I think Joe Biden has to imagine that there's going to continue to be organized and mobilized opposition to him, and that this will extend up and down. And I think he's going to have trouble getting approval of a lot of his nominees. I think that depending upon how things turn out in the Senate, there will be they will want to make a point of rejecting some of his nominees, forcing him to pick somebody else. So I don't think Biden's in for an easy passage. On the other hand, we know that a lot of Americans are just going to be relieved not to have the sort of anxiety about what is this guy tweeting? What is he going to do overnight? Who's he going to fire? You know, what military action might he order? So all of that, I think, is going to work in Biden's favor, and I think Biden will enjoy much more normal rates of public approval than Donald Trump ever has.
Yeah. And of course, we're going to have that anxiety for the next 6 weeks.
Well, you know, the Georgia election is a very exciting precursor to all of this, and so we'll look at the Georgia election. That'll tell us a lot about what's going to happen, what it's going to be like.
Those 2 Senate seats in Georgia, and then there have been 2 members of the House, quote unquote, majority that Biden's chosen for the cabinet. So I think Nancy Pelosi's majority is down to 2 seats or something like that in the House. So we really have a recipe for conflict going forward. Well, John Woolley, thank you so much for taking some time to talk with us. And I'm going to get you to agree to come back, because I know as we move towards Inauguration Day and beyond, there's going to be a lot of issues that you can offer so much context and background and history on, and I really appreciate you taking the time.
It's been fun talking to you, Jerry, and yeah, let's set up something.
All right, take care. Stay safe.
Yeah, thanks. You too.